Today, we are talking about something that Matthew and we just don't do anymore in our accounting firm. Most accountants, when you have a firm, you kind of have to do this. They all do it, but none of our partners at Acuity do it. And actually, Matthew and I are highly discouraged from doing it because when we do, there are problems. What is that thing? Yeah, selling. We don't sell anymore. And I was thinking about this specific topic because we were at a conference this week in Chicago, Randy Crabtree and the Tri-Merit teams, Bridging the Gap conference. And you were on a panel with Duke and some other folks and talking about marketing and sales. And as I observed in that panel, people were super fascinated and interested with like the things you were talking about in our sales team. So I thought I'd revisit a little bit of those here and describe the super strange, maybe different way that we do sales compared to most accounting firms. All that here on your regular happy hour conversation between a couple of guys building their accounting firm in very, very strange ways. This will be a good example of that. I'm your host, Kenji. Here's my buddy and co-host, Matthew. Matthew, have we been able to find a sponsor yet for this podcast?
No, but I'm gonna go. Today's episode of Drink While You Think is sponsored by Sales IQ. If you want to find Sales IQ, go to verifyiq.co and search madly on our website because it is hidden. Find Sales IQ and you will. We're working on that, but that's okay. Sales IQ.
Think of it as a game.
It's an adventure to find it, but once you do, it accelerates your sales process like no other tool in the accounting industry.
And perfect tie-in. We're talking about sales anyway, so thank you.
That's what inspired me for doing that.
Thank you, Sales IQ. What are you drinking today, Matthew?
I'm going outside my norm, but I'm going with a kind of a more conventional brand, Sierra Nevada. I'm going with the Ruthless Rye IPA today. It's a 6.6%er, and I'm pouring it in a glass because I'm morbidly curious to see if it's dark enough for my taste, but that's all right.
Rye will make it dark. That is outside
That's outside my comfort zone, folks. Here we go.
Good for you. Here's what I'm doing. A classic. A Hoegaarden. That's kind of a classic one. And
you're going to double us up. I bet we've already rated that one.
So. I looked. We haven't. Let's do a quick cheers. And I want to say more about the beer real quick. Cheers.
Cheers. How have we not done that one yet?
No, we have not. I know. Here's why I picked this beer today. It was the lowest alcohol content beer I could find.
Yeah, you did have a rough night the other night.
Nights? How about plurals? Let's just say these conferences, people are killers. They're no joke. And don't sleep on Chicago. Chicago, that's just Midwestern folks. I know from going up there, Chicago gets after it. We got after it. I wished I had non-alcoholic beer. I almost ran to the store to get some to try it. I was too lazy to go out. That's how I decided my beer today, coming out of the conference. Okay. Let's actually talk about productive things that happened at the conference, unlike things that Kenji in particular, but also even Matthew, you had a good time there too. We're doing late in the evenings.
Yep.
So let's talk about Acuity's sales and the fact that, again, starting at the top, that we're not involved. We are discouraged from the sales process. Why would you say that people don't like at Acuity, Matthew, and you and I get involved in the sales process?
Well, they have names for them. They call them Matthew specials. Like anything Matthew's involved with, or Kenji has a Kenji special, Matthew has a Matthew special. They always seem to be these one-off quirky things that are inbound for some friend or family member that is out there, somebody we've known for a decade, and it makes everybody's head explode.
What would you say would be the most common? Are there common themes in the Matthew and Kenji specials of like, what have we typically done? Like, what's usually going wrong in the Matthew and Kenji specials? Do you have any?
Well, for sure, we scope it wrong.
That's number one. That's number one.
I mean, that's number one. Number two, people misquote us all the time and like overexert their like, I know Kenji, Matthew, whatever, to get people outside of our normal processes. That's number two. Like they just flex and like, I know Matthew or I know Kenji, and then somebody down the road The best one ever was when one of our teammates was like, I know Matthew too, and there's no way he said that. It was Rabia one time holding the line on somebody. And he's like, I'm gonna go talk to Matthew. And she was like, go ahead. Like
There's no way he said that.
I've
Yes.
known him for 8 years. There's no way he said that. Like
That's a
she's like, it
that's a
was
good
awesome.
reminder to our team. It's like all of them pretty much know us better than these quote unquote specials.
Matthew
But that
specials.
said,
Yeah.
but nothing like setting poor expectations up front. Yes, expectations are set rather poorly when I'm involved. We can do
Oh yeah,
sure we can do that. Oh,
yeah,
we'll figure out the price. Yeah, all of
I'm
us.
sure we can do that. I'm sure we can do that. Yeah. So we don't set expectations, we don't scope it right, and then the people claim to like try to get something, either a deal down the way or like some special side thing because they think they're special. So
And that's actually not the, I mean, yes, the Matthew and Kenji specials are problematic. I'd love to see actually, I would not like to see the NPS scoring or the churn rates on Matthew and Kenji specials, or just how it negatively impacts our team on those particular cohorts of clients, because I'm sure it's awful. But
it's
that
gonna
is
be
actually
bad.
not that's not the reason why we did it. I think, we'll maybe get into like why we did this. And I'll say, hey, I think we saw some opportunity to say, if we're going to scale, that will be yet one more place. We are limited if it's always dependent on you and I or any of the founders or owners selling. So it probably started with that
Mhm.
theme,
For sure.
for sure. And I guess we had done kind of business development at Acuity with a non-partner, more traditional business development, really expensive people out there going to networking groups and things. That was horrible. That didn't work. That was prior to you. It was horrible. But that was kind of the classic public accounting way, right? I mean, you
Yep.
see how these funky silos. So we're like, all right, how do you scale consistently? How do we stay out of it? And so we kind of developed this sales strategy. Like, well, it's going to have to start with the big question. Well, we wanted to test, could we teach a non-accountant to sell accounting services? And that got asked in the room to you this week on your panel. And I watched people kind of around like shaking their head and like scratching, like, wait, what? You mean non-accountant selling accounting services? Let's talk about that for a second. Why would you say that's worked for us and having non-accountants do that?
Well, it's easier to train it's easier to train salespeople to learn accounting language than treat accountants to figure out sales behavior. I think that's the crux of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Completely agree. Um, I'd say another byproduct that I've noticed is I think non-accountants, and maybe it's not just because of the good sales skills they maybe inherently have, non-accountants tend to speak to business owners, to firm owners,
In
much more
English,
in a common in English, in a common language. They don't try to get all high and mighty. Well, let me tell you why you need to have this gap accrual schedule for your, you know, they don't care. The client doesn't care. And you got a salesperson who comes off as like, yep, I'm a regular Joe or Susie just like you, and accounting is kind of can be a challenge. Let's talk about how we can fix that, right? There's a relatability that
the
there's
other
sometimes
thing,
the
the
accountants just are
accountants,
bad about.
you know what accountants also try to do during sales meetings that I've found? I've observed they're more likely to try to start fixing the problem there on the phone.
Ooh, interesting.
And the salespeople can't fix it. They're not logging into QuickBooks. It's
No,
just it's gonna be bad.
yeah,
So
it is. So those were some of the premises and observations we've had. It wasn't easy. I mean, our success rate on, it's not like we came up with this idea and like it worked immediately. We've been quite a few people through the sales organization come through our
we went
doors.
through quite a few iterations
Yeah.
of what we're trying to do.
But so thinking about iterations, it has stayed kind of the same foundationally. And I'll start with just saying that where we built it off of was Matthew and I were really lucky. We had a whole bunch of our clients and candidly a lot of our friends, we all worked around in a technology co-working space. We were surrounded by people who used a different sales model than accountants use. And this is outbound sales model. And we weren't as connected in the accounting community then as we were now. We were way more connected in the tech community. So we just like leaned on our friends and fellow entrepreneurs about what they were doing, and just almost overly simplistically, maybe naively, we're like, well, we should probably start selling. I guess that's the way you do it. Seems different than we did in public accounting. So we took what appeared to be working in the technology space. And I remember we found that good book that we really liked, Predictable Revenue by Aaron Ross, had just come out. And that was like everybody was reading it in the tech community. It's like the big thing. And so we even handed that book out like to all of our salespeople, like had to read Predictable Revenue. So we're like, we were observing it worked for other people in very different businesses, but it worked for other people. And there was like a reference guide we could kind of go back to. And that's kind of how it started. But do you want to talk about some of the basic principles of what that means for like what if a sales organization is doing outbound, like what does that kind of look like from a 30,000 foot level?
Yeah, I can, but you know what's interesting? Just as you're saying that,
Yeah.
what I realized is we weren't plugged into the accounting community back then. So we didn't really have any other accounting firms to ask. So we looked to our other community, which is kind of, we probably should think about that as a profession. It's like making sure we look outside our profession for some best practices in some areas sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good
Because
observation.
I'm leaning more back on doing that in because we try to do with that with the IT community, and we've done that a couple of times at Acuity. That's really served us well from
It
a
has
client.
served us well. Yeah, that's been a very successful strategy for us, is
Yeah,
looking for inspiration outside of just the same profession we're in, right?
yeah. So, but digress there. The way the outbound kind of works is we have people. I'll call them appointment setters. If you get sophisticated in this and you need to post a job, you either call them a sales development rep or a BD or a business developer rep, so a SDR or BDR. So you have appointment setters, and their whole job is to set appointments for your other role, which is your closer. And then if you post that job, you call it account executive, you don't call it closer. So you have an account executive, you have sales development rep, and that's kind of this symbiotic relationship of kind of what the organization looks like. And depending on your industry or there's like an optimal ratio. We're running right now. We're running 4 appointment setters to 1 closer, and we just added our second closer, and we're going to see if inbound offsets that, or if we need to increase the number of appointment setters that we have based on the volume, because we do have some marketing traction going, because everything works symbiotically. There's not like you only do one thing in this place, right, to grow.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then the appointment setters in the outbound world. So in the inbound world, like people are coming to your website, the appointment center can just guide people through, answer questions, and get them on the closer calendar. But in the outbound world, what they do is they take what we call an ICP, or an ideal client profile. The ideal client profile is very specific. This is like, in our case, I'll walk you through one of the ICPs. We have about 4 of them that we work pretty actively, but one of them is we want to have a CEO or founder title on LinkedIn, less than 10 employees, working in the technology industry with no accountants on staff. So they search the world for those people that meet that criteria, and then they just bombard them with emails and stuff like that to try to get them to our website, or get them to read an email, or get them to an appointment. So they'll do, in our world, they'll do something like what we call like a 5x8 or 8x12. So 5x8, 8x12. 5 is just the number of touches, and then the second number is just the number of days you do that over on a business day. So we've experimented from anything from a 5x8 to an 8x12. So 5x8 is like, would be 5 touches. So email, phone call, email, phone call, email over an 8 business day period. I think right now we're on an 8x12. So we do 8 of those. So it's just the same thing. And instead of phone call, it's a voicemail usually, but email, voicemail, email, voicemail, email, voicemail, email, email, I think is what we go with right now over a 12 business day cycle.
Right.
And the goal of that is to try to get people to engage, to disqualify themselves, anything to identify, to make sure you're in our target market and a potential fit. So we have a couple qualifying questions they're trying to get them through, but in our case, because our sales cycle is so short and because the type of client we're going after is pretty small, we try not to have our appointment setters talk too much to those people because they don't like repeating themselves. So we want them doing most of their talking with the closer. So I'll pause and breathe so you can
Yeah,
talk.
you pause, breathe,
Correct
have
me
a
on that one.
drink. I'll give a quick synopsis of that. Again, sales role basically broken into two main functions. I think calls it appointment setter. Sometimes you'll hear about people called prospecting. They're the ones out finding the initial leads, kind of responsibility for that. And then they set the appointment, that's the transition period, over to the closer. So prospecting, closing, those two are separated. And I would say in my experience, the why, like why do you separate that? That's not separated typically in public accounting or in other roles. Very, very different activities on that prospecting role with the BDRs and SDRs. It's really high volume, very lots and lots of no's. You're managing tons of data things. It is transactional. Okay. So people don't like to sell transactionally, they say, but hey, it is a very, very transactional thing versus you need to get it over to the account executive who can be who's the closer, who can focus a bit on a more of a relational consultative type of sale. And I think that what the premise in that book is just those two activities, no matter how good of a salesperson, are difficult to really manage well. Like you intermix transactional and kind of consultative, it's just very, very difficult. So by nature, you segregate those and do them separately.
But why I don't understand why more accountants don't do this is a very numbers game,
I was just
right?
going to say that. Talk about. I want to get into the numbers. This is
So
where we got excited. I think other accountants would get excited about this.
so yeah, so
Share
what
that.
our math is, we have like an appointment setter has to do 1,000 individual reach outs, like not 1,000 emails, like to 1,000 different people, results in 12 appointments, which results in 3 new clients. So for the math, like to be able to do like this is why accountants can't do this job also is 1,000, like reaching out to 1,000 people to only get 3 clients.
What I heard was 997 people said, "See ya, get out of here."
Well, yeah, like 500 people just ignore you completely, or like 750
It's
nowadays.
hard. Yeah, that's
But
hard.
it's hard. It's hard, right? So like, but you can measure the math at each of those places, right? And so these are your levers. And as the environment changes and email rules change and phone rules change and whatever you want changes, as your inbound increases, you can kind of modify how you do it. But I do feel like we're more in control of our growth than
Oh
other
yeah,
people.
yeah, and this is something that. So okay, once you get rid of the whole like, oh my gosh, I just had so many people ignore me and say no to me. The hard part that I hate as well too. You know how relational I am. Once you get through that, oh, that upside of it being analytical of like that's what should get accountants pretty fired up because when you're into the data, you and I remember when we were in this role and you and I are grinding through it and kind of sharing ideas and we'd go look at the numbers. Okay, wait, why is our conversion percentage lower? And you can work backwards into the funnel as they often call it, but it's basically just looking back into your process. And the tools are such that these days you can kind of watch these conversion rates of where these prospects and leads fall out. And you can start drawing some conclusions as to why. Like, oh, why are they all dropping out after this email or a bunch of them mark you as spam, whatever it is. And you're like, well, let's go analyze that email. Does the subject line stink? Is it dumb? Is there something in there that we did, what's in
Or
the
is it not dumb enough?
not dumb enough? That's the thing. What's the wording in it? And so you can, I won't say gamify it, but you can really go back and look through and figure out and experiment, run lots of experiments, small iterations. We were never good at small iterations. We like to do too many things at once. So we didn't know often.
Well, the team now is great at small
They're good.
iterations.
Yeah.
So.
Once again, another reason why you let the team do things versus me and Matthew, because we probably had some of our funny, crazy things we did in that sales function because of just crazy ideas that you and I used to have.
Yeah, we would do stupid stuff.
But yeah, that's kind of how it works. Is you can run that math, and then applied to all this is your customer acquisition cost. You can look at this and go, oh, what are the cost of my tools, my team members? Because I think that initially people get scared off when they hear, I can't invest 1,000 leads and the time and energy for those to only get 3 deals. That math sounds broken until you spend the time really calculating the costs and just kind of hustling and finding ways to do it a little bit better and more efficiently. But once you kind of get to a point where you're like, wait a minute, the basic math should certainly be the value of the deal that you close. Some express it in different ways. We try to look at it where we can in terms of long-term value of a client, which we think the appropriate way to calculate that is average length of time you keep a client and the gross profit you generate from that client is your LTV. So in theory, okay, at least if the value of that client is higher than the cost to acquire them, okay, you at least kind of breaking even-ish, right? You're
Right.
trying to get that bumped up there. And they talk about tech companies used to target 3x times that, but you're basically just trying to keep that math in line. And so if you've got a good data, you can follow all that through and figure out where you can tweak and make adjustments to that process.
Yeah, but even in our, like, one of the things to think about, I guess, when we didn't realize it, we kind of learned the hard way, was like the payback period when you move to a sales function. The non-partner sales function is basically you don't make money on any, it takes 10 months to pay off the commissions
On a recurring engagement, yeah.
like on a gross margin basis on those recurring basis. So like for us, we've been at 10 months for quite a long time, actually. So we've been about 10 months payback period, somewhere between 9 and 12 always, because our clients stay with us 2 to 3 years on average, depending on what year we're talking about. So that's something to think about too when you're thinking about strategies like this, is that cash flow needed to fund 10 months of 10 months of customer acquisition costs. It's front loaded because like the other way to grow is inorganically, right? Buying a firm, which you could, for a long time, you could spread that payment over 5 years. Well, we do a lot of, organic growth, so that cost comes up front and paid in the year, but pays back within 10 months. So it's expensive, but
once you're there,
it's cheaper long term than buying a firm for us, right? So it's I think
we've done that math on both sides. It was like,
it's about 60. Like our organic strategy costs about 60 cents on the dollar versus whatever multiple you're going to pay. So if so that's
the thing to look out for there. In Matthew, we alluded to it a bit. We talked about determining the long-term value of a customer. You really need to dive in.
I say the lifetime value of the customer.
Thank you.
Oh.
But the thing we miss out on is the first time you do this, oftentimes you don't have data on what that lifetime is of a customer. So it's probably the first place I've seen, we did this initially and others do it, is you're making an estimate. And so that's probably one of the bigger estimates, but and if you're significantly off there or being unreasonable, you could make a big mistake if you're not really tracking that, because if that's off, we saw that happen in actuality when we were losing people much quicker and we weren't really looking at churn data very well. We weren't looking at,
how fast they were leaving.
That's critical in this model, is to make sure you're really all over churn and watching that on a real-time basis, because that will be a very strong leading indicator of some cash flow issues, of getting upside down, of brokenness, that if you let that run for too long, you're going to get in a tough spot.
Yeah, one of the things we're pretty conservative how we calculate lifetime value is we calculate off your initial engagement with us, as opposed to typically when people work with us over time, they actually add services. So probably pretty conservative when we do our LTV to CAC comparisons, because we do those real time off of an assumption versus off of actuals. So
right.
But that's like that's like advanced having an outbound sales team function. So we're not even there yet. So
no, we're not. And so in thinking about that, what do you, many fundamentals have been actually surprisingly consistent in this outbound strategy. What have you seen that's probably changed the most from when we first started doing this? Like what things like, oh, that's different now, or things we've had to adjust for in this model where, you and I or the other partners don't sell?
Well, the biggest thing we changed, just being transparent with people, is that the partners don't sell now. So when we started, if you remember, we wanted to know if this worked.
Yeah,
So we wouldn't let them sell Atlanta, which is our home base,
that's right. I forgot.
because that was selling off our brand. So we wanted the outbound to work for the outbound sake. So I actually love that strategy, right? Like I think it's really hard with marketing and sales to figure out what works, but having them not be able to call or cold call people in Atlanta was almost like protection for us, right?
Right.
Because in the ecosystem, we were still doing relationship sales in Atlanta market. Like that was a true indicator of it being successful. If we got a client in Austin, Texas, or San Francisco or New York, that was not trading on the Acuity brand or the Kenji or Matthew name, right? So we were convinced that it was successful then. So starting there was really helpful for me because we were skeptical, right? Like we
Right.
were like nobody does this in accounting. There must be a reason nobody does this in accounting. Um, but so I think the biggest thing has changed is when I stopped selling and you
Mm,
stopped selling.
yeah.
And that meant all inbound and outbound went through the sales team. And when I saw the lift there, that's when I saw the lift from the scoping, the expectation setting, all that was much more systematized. Notes being in the CRM, like the onboarding team have been set up for success, like all those things that we saw lift. That was the biggest change more than anything we
Mm,
did in
okay. Yeah.
sales, right? Because I
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
feel like the sales still has that experimental culture, right? They're experiment messaging, experiment with calls, experiment with different tools. Like they still do all that. So that's the biggest
I
change.
would say, yeah, I want to build on that for a second because I was coming to my mind before you said it. And that is something that is such a benefit to us and to other. If you do this as a firm, it's the perfect place to experiment. It's really a great testing ground just for that, because you can completely, without you being involved, go focus on a vertical, focus on what maybe an area of the country, focus on a new service line and test that. Like, right. That's what ultimately what you're doing is grabbing testing data about, does a message resonate with a particular business owner, whoever that customer you're hoping that customer to be. And I think that was something really helpful for us, like really helpful. Like it back to what one of the reasons why we've noticed of getting out of this is, I think it does help to speak in a way to clients that's not just an accounting jargon. And kind of this exercise of outbound sales forces you to do that. You are absolutely having to communicate in a way that they will respond to. And good luck these days getting through inboxes and voicemails. It is really hard. So there's got to be something resonant with them in there. So I think that's just a huge benefit. The other one, and I have to give huge shout outs to our sales team, in particular, the man, Tyler. And that is, he came to us when he was really young, almost right out of college, and he worked his way through that first role that Matthew talked about of the business development rep, sales development rep, and worked his way into an account exec, the closer. So he really learned that a lot about selling, but he also learned a tremendous amount about the organization. In fact, today, I think it's something we've noticed from being easily one of our youngest team members. He still is young. He has a really good understanding, in some ways a better understanding than a number of us accountants do, about how Acuity works, because he has to describe it every day and set expectations around it. He has great insights and feedback about what customers want. And so it's a lot of it is he's just an incredible guy. We're very lucky to have him as a colleague. But I think that that's a benefit of someone in sales, is they're advocating on behalf of the customer almost everything else we do is so internally driven around the accountant team, and having someone that sales team will pick up the voice of the customer. And that's been beneficial when they get that experience. That's something that I didn't expect. So a number of other good reasons, experiments, bring that voice of the customer really into in a more demonstrable way back into the organization, even beyond just helping you close deals. But I think that's kind of been great. What else on the sales side? I'm trying to think of things that other people were interested in there at the conference.
Well, I think one thing, I don't know if people were interested in this in the conference, but things that we know that aren't really intuitive is that are important to this, like how you sell, is understanding who you're selling to and the ticket size. So if you're a mid-market firm and you're trying to get these 80K a year clients, right, or 50K a year clients, you might have a different process. Understand we're talking about a $12,000 a year client, right? So $1,000 a month. Our early entry point is somewhere at 300 and change a month, $400, say. So 400, so $4,800 a year. So that is another thing to think about when you're deciding whether to do this. This is a short sales cycle, very important thing. So, but each step along the way, I still think you can do it with SDRs and AEs, but you might, if you're a $100,000 opportunity or $1 million opportunity, the SDR would have to talk to people,
Yep,
right?
absolutely.
And deal with stuff. And then they would have to map out the decision makers at the organization and do the whatever account.
So that's
like
exactly
account-based
what
sales, right?
If we were selling, let's say it's 10 times the size of our average deal, let's say at least $100,000 with our average client, we would definitely change the way that they're selling. It would be lots of the same fundamentals, but I would definitely cut back. They wouldn't be going after 1,000 at all. Maybe you chop that down pretty significantly. And to your point, there is much more, they're prospecting, but there is much more research. To Matthew's point is looking back through the organization and saying, hey, I'm not just going to go find that ICP, like we talked about earlier, and shove it in the system and kind of start focusing. It's going to be much more personalized. It's going to be, oh, they're connected to someone else we know here. You're going to start mapping out the org. You're going to start looking at it differently and taking more time with it. Because again, that strategy is going to be way more effective than just blasting out there. You typically find that if someone, okay, maybe someone doesn't like the unsolicited outreach.
Yeah.
Even if you're trying to provide value, but also if it's something that's a low price point, that doesn't come off as strange. Now, if it's, it should be on a higher dollar purchase, something coming through some form of a relationship or some form of research there, right? You can invest more time and energy into.
Like anecdotally, like I've observed that like kind of somewhere around $2 or $3 million of revenue for the prospect side. The sales process changes on our side, right? Typically at that volume or higher, like if they come in at that volume or higher, it adds a step. So usually there's a second call with the closer or the account executive and an SME. So they'll pull in somebody with e-commerce specialty or crypto
sales
specialty.
engineer, they used to call them, or
sales,
an SME.
They're basically a subject matter expert, a sales engineer, but that's kind of pulling in somebody. Yeah. The nice thing about that also that we're doing good now is that's not one of the partners here.
Right.
Just different than a lot of people. But like, even if it was us, you would still have somebody running the process.
Right.
I did that for a period of time, but I stopped that kind of when we brought in our crypto expert, and now he's able to do that.
Yeah.
As opposed to me on the crypto calls, right?
Yeah, absolutely right. I'm gonna leave with one more of these, but like one more question before we land this thing. What's been like do you have a story or anything you remember that's been like a surprising that you have like, how did that work? Like what's like things that you just did not seem like, I can't believe that attracted attention. And I'll go first and maybe this will plant some seeds, hopefully not take things away. But you alluded to this earlier of like the dumb message, right? That kind of, so it's been, that's been one thing
that stupid GIF that like,
you got to put a GIF in there with like a dog or some pet or do something silly. This used to be the place I remember first seeing it was they called it the breakup email. And this is the, oh, you must be too busy to, pick up because you're busy riding a donkey through, the sub-Saharan jungle or something, whatever. It'd just be some silly visual. And there was probably a period of time when like everybody started doing that, like, because it was the email within that cadence and sequence that Matthew mentioned. It was essentially just kind of like, all right, I get it. You're not interested. Like, see you later. And that thing started converting more people. Like a little bit of humor in it. Something's like, okay, you seem like you're kind of funny and nice. I'll actually take the meeting. I'll take the demo. And that's changed some now. I think that's kind of be overplayed, but I remember being like, you got to be kidding me. That is what is getting people's attention. Not even the one message in our entire script that didn't even talk about accounting. That was the one that's converting deals. So I always remember that. What about you?
Oh, I mean, we have this 50,000 person database to the people we like first, like, let's say we drug in through this poor process I feel so bad for. So I was always amazed when we were having a slow month, we'd be like, let's do a promo. And we do like $450 off onboarding. And we would send that out, and then they're booked through the end of the month because it had a
Our
time
accounting
period
sector,
on
yeah,
it. Like it was like creating some urgency. Blows my mind that that's in accounting, that's a trigger.
these are things we like to make fun of as like, well, we're accountants and professionals. I've never used that kind of ridiculous,
A
like, oh,
coupon.
a coupon, or, oh, a funny GIF. Well, guess what? Like, shame on us for like not, that's what experiments will teach you, is that you're wrong oftentimes. These things work in other places, and
Oh, we
why not
tried
try them?
everything. We've tried like free software subscriptions, things we thought were valuable. Um, but like if you run a buy, BOGO, like stupid, like buy 1 month, get the second month free. Like, I mean, stupid, $450 off. I don't know why $450 works so well, but like we experiment with $250, $350, $750, $450 worked better than everything else so far. So it's just crazy.
Have fun with it, folks. Get in there, have fun with it. It is weird. People will be endlessly entertained by your crazy panel stories at conferences, just like they were with Matthew
You
that
you
couldn't
do
get enough of
you
them.
do have to have somebody like constantly re-entering like their Gmail, so because they get banned so often from Gmail.
There's
So
a
that
bunch of
took some
things that go
getting.
wrong.
There's a bunch of stuff that
Get
goes
ready for
wrong.
your email administration, all your sales, CRM stuff getting complicated. There's a million other things happening there. But if you keep in perspective of like, you get to run some pretty crazy experiments. And ultimately, if it works, you get to get out of selling and it'll get better.
And it's just math.
Just math. It's just math.
You
Folks,
guys
do you hear
have
that? Matthew said, sales is just math. Don't be afraid of sales. It's just math. Okay. Let's rate some beers. I'm sure I will once again, for the millionth time, screw up my screen sharing.
oh, it worked.
It worked. The Hoegaarden. The Hoegaarden gets a 1.5.
Really, you're in a grumpy mood, dude.
Dude, can you see this? I'm gonna come back to the screen here, but like, look how much I got through. When have I not finished a beer on Drink Week? And I'm sorry, Hoegaarden, that's a Kenji penalty from Chicago that got laid upon you. That's not very fair, but it is what it is. That's what's happening today. Okay, let's go back in here, Matthew.
So the
And let's show.
Ruthless Rye IPA from Sierra Nevada.
Think about that while I pull this up here. The Ruthless Rye.
Fluctuating here.
There it is.
Not sure. I'm not sure how to go here. I
Okay.
think I'm gonna go 3.5 on this one.
Okay, not
So
bad.
better than I would for a normal IPA. Like lots better than a normal IPA. So that was
So
pretty.
that the color, the depth, that color impacts you greatly. You
It
know.
the color does impact me greatly. So
Well, next time we're on, I'll hopefully be in a better position to judge beers than I currently am at this moment. But
I'm gonna go drink more beers because I didn't go as hard as you this week. So
that's typical. But you're smarter than me. We all know that. I'm funner than you. You're smarter than me, which is why you're in better shape of things today. That describes everything about why today you're in better shape than me. That said, it was great seeing a whole bunch of friends at the conference. We look forward to some more of those again. And hey, all of our friends who are listening, we are appreciative that you listen, subscribe, drop some comments.
And if you'd
I
like to sponsor the podcast,
yes,
what do you think? All you have to do is
I
send
think
us
we're a
a beer.
little overdue. I feel like we need some guests. I'm going to work on some guests,
Oh, I
but
got one for you. I got one for you. We got to do
great. Okay, we'll get some guests on here, but we'll also make sure too. We've had some good feedback about people like us sharing all the crazy, weird things we do in Acuity. And so we'll make sure we try to keep this firm oriented focus so you can hear about all the wild ways that not just us, but other accounting friends are building their firms. But thanks for joining. Cheers, everyone.